The big question for this segment is, what are the global environmental governance challenges posed by the extreme complexity of the Anthropocene? The Anthropocene is a proposed new geological epoch in which human activities are positioned as replacing natural processes as the key driver of Earth systems change. Scientific research into whether we have moved out of the Holocene, a remarkably stable epoch that has sustained human and non-human life over the past 10 to 12,000 years, is ongoing and the source of much debate. Despite this uncertainty, the concept of the Anthropocene has gained traction, posing complex challenges for global environmental governance. Much of the complexity derives from concerns about the relationship between current development directions and the destabilization of planetary systems. In 2009, Johan Rockström and colleagues suggested there are at least 9 planetary boundaries that should not be exceeded if a safe operating space for humanity is to be maintained. In their view, some of these have already been exceeded, such as biodiversity loss and changes to the nitrogen cycle, whereas others, like climate change, are rapidly approaching safe boundaries. Other Earth scientists, like Stefan and colleagues, have argued that human contributions to Earth systems changes have been particularly prominent in the post-war period from the 1950s onwards, often referred to as the Great Acceleration. In this period, advances in human development also occurred at a greater rate than ever before, with technological and social changes resulting in healthier and longer lives in many parts of the world. When combined, these trends are worrying. The development pathways that are contributing to human benefits appear to be occurring at the expense of planetary stability. The challenge for global environmental governance is to rethink development in more earthy ways. The challenge of sustainable development is a complex one that has occupied researchers and policymakers since at least the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. At the global scale, progress has been slow, although there have been a few notable successes, such as international efforts oriented at preventing the further depletion of ozone. The general trend, however, has been towards greater ecological degradation. Despite a proliferation of international environmental agreements, the very idea of the Anthropocene is indicative of this failure. There are multiple complexities facing improved global environmental governance, 3 of which I will consider here. Firstly, what general approach should underpin development in the Anthropocene? Secondly, what particular strategies should be adopted to lessen and respond to Earth systems change? And finally, how can such strategies be implemented in fair and just ways? In terms of a general approach to the Anthropocene, it is useful to consider 2 opposing poles of thought, between which most responses lie. The first approach, sometimes referred to as eco-modernism, argues that investing more in science and technology will result in breakthroughs that will lessen human impacts on the environment. Proponents promote the idea of a good Anthropocene, in which innovative technologies like geoengineering, genetic modification, and renewable energies, as well as improved environmental policies, such as payments for environmental services, will provide the solutions to Anthropocene challenges. Eco-modernists are generally optimists who believe in human ingenuity to overcome environmental crises. In their view, current patterns of development can continue with only minor changes to incorporate improvements in environmental technologies and policies. In contrast, a more critical body of work suggests that Western science and technology are part of the problem, not the solution. They argue that the Anthropocene is a result of a disconnect between humans and nature that lies at the heart of modern societies. Proponents instead promote the view that human and natural systems are irrevocably entwined, referring to concepts like socio-ecological systems and indigenous knowledges to stress human-nature connections rather than disconnections. For this group, the Anthropocene requires fundamental changes to the goals and processes of development, in which development is reorientated towards socio-ecological stability rather than its current fixation on economic growth. This group is more likely to be associated with concerns about justice, consumption, and alternatives to capitalist economic models. Most environmentally concerned people and institutions fit somewhere between these 2 poles, resulting in conflicting priorities. Where they sit shapes how they respond to the second challenge. What particular strategies should be adopted to lessen and respond to Earth systems change? In general, these strategies fall into 2 main categories: mitigation and adaptation. Firstly, those concerned with mitigation focus on how societies can reduce the adverse impacts humans are having on planetary systems. This involves identifying the processes that are driving unwanted Earth systems change and developing alternatives that reduce or reverse those impacts. This is a difficult process, given the complexity of modelling diverse Earth systems change. Eco-modernists are likely to pursue technological solutions such as geoengineering, renewable energy, and nuclear power, whilst critical researchers are likely to advocate socio-economic changes that result in reduced consumption patterns more attuned to local environmental limits. Secondly, those working on adaptation focus on how societies can prepare for and adapt to Earth systems change. This involves preparing for changed climate conditions, like drought or more intense storms, or adapting to a world of decreased ecosystems resilience as a consequence of biodiversity loss. Once again, eco-modernists are likely to pursue technological solutions through things like genetic engineering, drought-resistant crops, or building seawalls to address sea level rise, while proponents of the critical view are likely to promote building on local strengths and knowledges to develop alternative, resilient, and sustainable socio-ecological systems. Clearly then, a complex and competing array of responses are possible when approaching the challenges of the Anthropocene. These responses require changes to current development pathways, most of which involve some sort of economic or other cost, and as a consequence require considerable political will. These costs are borne out unevenly between and within countries and are a source of tension. Coming to an agreement on who should pay for the costs incurred in developing more appropriate and resilient socio-ecological processes has proved to be a complex problem for global environmental governance. This is a third challenge then, how mitigation and adaptation strategies in the Anthropocene can be implemented in fair and just ways. A key problem here arises from the scalar mismatch between the planetary scale of Anthropocene problems and the country scale responsibilities for environmental governance. There is no government or enforcement mechanism operating at the planetary scale of Anthropocene issues. Instead, committees like the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change have struggled to come to agreement on who should be responsible for funding climate mitigation and adaptation programs, with disagreements, particularly between wealthier and less wealthy countries, slowing action. In addition, being a good global environmental citizen may buy some international kudos, but it may not be well received at home, particularly if there is an economic cost attached. Governments are responsible primarily to their citizens, who have many more immediate and pressing concerns than that of planetary stability. Hence, even if a government has identified an overall approach to the Anthropocene and prioritised some mitigation and adaptation strategies, it will often face a battle to convince its own population, particularly those industries and parts of the population who will bear the brunt of the costs, that any change to current development directions is necessary. It is vital that such changes are pursued in fair and just ways. Many governments have opted not to address these challenges in any significant way for fear of the political cost. In summary, the Anthropocene presents fundamental challenges to the development models that have evolved in the post-war period. We are currently on track to destabilise the planetary boundaries that have sustained human and non-human life over the past 10 to 12,000 years. However, coming to an agreement on what overall approach should be taken to address the Anthropocene, what particular strategies should be prioritised, and who should be responsible for taking action are all complex challenges that must be addressed as we enter a new and uncertain period of planetary development. These are extremely complex but also extremely important questions. Business as usual is not a long-term option.